When a suicide occurs, ripples of pain, sorrow, and grief affect many people in the community. One person's suicide may put others at risk by inspiring more thoughts of suicide. How a community reacts to a suicide affects the overall well-being and health of community members and others who knew the deceased. That's why it's so important for a community to heal together. Creating a postvention plan and putting together a team in your community to carry out the plan promotes healing and helps reduce the risk of more suicides. Many communities throughout Alaska have created suicide prevention coalitions, task forces, and work groups. It makes sense to coordinate suicide prevention and postvention efforts. In fact, postvention becomes prevention. Use the Postvention Planning Next Steps chapter in the Postvention Guide to find prevention groups and resources in the state when you start your postvention planning. Everyone can be involved in postvention. Mental health, education, social services, and spiritual providers all need to be engaged. The benefit of a large network of community members who can participate is that there will be adequate resources, which will ensure that grieving community members' needs are met. This includes youth. Young people want to talk about suicide because it affects them, and they want it to stop. When establishing a postvention plan, it's important to remember the guiding principles, which are listed in the Postvention Guide, Postvention Planning Next Steps chapter. By being mindful of these tenets when creating your plan, you'll be ensuring that they will be part of the plan implementation. Guiding principles. Structure and information reduces chaos and insecurity. Factual communication and open support reduce stigma and increase access to resources. Safe messaging should guide all informal and formal communication. Grief will be expressed in many different ways, and levels of impact and length of grieving will vary. How a suicide is handled affects the risk factors for others, especially youth and other vulnerable individuals. Traumatic loss and healing are community issues and do not belong to just one organization or group to resolve. Cultural practices and norms may guide responses to grief expressions. Be prepared to see the process through the long term. Self-care and help-seeking are important for everyone to practice. As we mentioned, an effective postvention plan includes the entire community. You can see that the possibilities are many. Try to involve as many stakeholders as possible in your plan. Possible key stakeholders: Public Health Network, clergy, spiritual leaders, mental health center, substance abuse treatment center, law enforcement, first responders, school crisis team members, behavioral health response team, community coordinator, disaster response team, village and tribal leaders, social services, funeral director, medical examiner, media, survivors, survivor supports. Setting goals for your postvention plan is vital. You'll find a comprehensive list of these desired goals in the Postvention Planning Next Steps chapter in the Postvention Guide. Due to time constraints on this video, we would recommend using the list found there as your resource. This list of goals will help you establish priorities, set proper procedure, and offer suggestions on how to achieve the goals. The ultimate goal is to help survivors and prevent future suicides. Now that you're familiar with the guiding principles, made note of the key stakeholders, and set your goals, you're ready to create your postvention plan. An easy way to start the plan is by listing answers to the first 72 hours checklist questions. These can be found in the Postvention Planning Next Steps chapter of the Postvention Guide. Once you've done that, answering some additional questions will be helpful. Who in the community has had training? What kind of training would your community like to have? Whom would it make sense to train? Who will speak to the media? You may want to have more than one person for each role, in case the primary person isn't available. Understanding how to speak safely about suicide is an important step. Teaching people how to talk about a suicide death safely is key to changing how people perceive suicide. Could someone give a safe messaging training in the community, and if so, who should attend? Having answers to all of these questions will aid in creating your postvention plan. You should also consider the following suggestions when creating a community postvention plan. Assemble the right people. First, identify mental health professionals and community and youth leaders who are willing and able to be part of a postvention response team. Identify a community coordinator who can lead the efforts when they are needed. Involve gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are an important part of postvention efforts and can serve on an emergency response team. Alaska gatekeepers have learned the risk factors and warning signs for suicide, as well as factors that protect a person against suicide. They can also help survivors and community members reduce access to lethal means after a suicide by educating community members about the need to secure firearms, weapons, and pills. For information on gatekeepers and gatekeeper training, please refer to the Postvention Guide, Postvention Planning Next Steps chapter. Communicate effectively. Set up a way to reach team members quickly if a suicide occurs. You'll want to meet within 24 hours of a death, so pick a place to meet ahead of time. Provide safe and accurate information. Your postvention response team will need a protocol to request and receive accurate information about the suicide. This may require formal memoranda of understanding and agreement with local law enforcement and health officials to ensure that all legal and privacy protections are observed. Decide on a protocol for how the postvention response team will communicate with the general public if a suicide occurs to reduce the risk of contagion. If the death is being covered by the news, you may want to contact the media to let them know your postvention team exists and what healing events you have planned, and to share the media guidelines with them. Be ready. Alaska 211, the Alaska Mental Health Board, Rural CAP, and other agencies can help you develop a list of services available to survivors of a suicide loss and to other community members, as well as show you how you can connect people to the appropriate services. Once your team knows what's available, take time to talk to the service providers on your list and discuss how to best connect community members to services and what follow-up might be needed. With these partners, identify what needs to happen automatically after a suicide versus what can be activated as needed. Be careful. Postvention response teams aim to make things better, not cause new problems. Call the statewide suicide prevention coordinator or the statewide suicide prevention council to make sure your plan follows the most current knowledge of how to best respond. You might look into Connect postvention training. The state has offered Connect training, and some groups and individuals from rural and urban Alaska have taken it and found it to be helpful. The URL for Connect training and the number for the statewide Suicide Prevention Council can be found in the Postvention Planning Next Steps chapter in the Postvention Guide. Be thoughtful. Create a protocol for how and when to interact with the family and friends of the deceased. Decide who will contact the survivors of the loss to suicide and how they will do it. Discuss how the team members will react when help is declined and how to provide appropriate and helpful services when help is requested. Communicate. Once the postvention response plan is created, it should be made public so that everyone in the community understands what will happen, when it will happen, and how it will happen. Your local media might be able to help you with this. You can also give contact information in case people are interested in volunteering. For information on trainings available in your area, including Critical Incident Stress Management, CISM, and Connect training, go to www.stopsuicidealaska.org. Act fast, be steady. Postvention needs to be timely and consistent to be effective. The team coordinator should call the team to meet within 24 hours to discuss how the plan will be followed and, if any changes to the plan are needed, to appropriately respond to the specific suicide. Focus on facts. After a suicide occurs, it is vital to ensure that misinformation is not circulating around the community. This could lead to a greater risk of contagion. To make sure that rumors are quashed, the team should ask law enforcement for accurate information about what happened as quickly as possible, then decide whether to respond to any misinformation in the community. Be sure to follow your protocols carefully so that every postvention response is consistent and fair. Reach out. Reach out to family, friends, and other survivors in a coordinated way rather than team members reaching out independently without talking to one another. Imagine if one family were to be contacted by 5 people and another family wasn't to hear from anyone. Make sure that resources and services are provided if requested. Identify potentially vulnerable individuals in the community. This would include people who are connected with the person who died by suicide, possibly through school, work, or church. Then provide resources and services where needed. Determine if a community meeting is needed to discuss the risk of contagion and warning signs of someone who is at risk of suicide. You might also want to talk about the resources and services available to people and families in crisis. Communicate carefully. Team members must be careful to follow their own communication rules to ensure safe and lawful communications about the suicide. Make sure no team members give information to the media that the team has learned from law enforcement or health officials that cannot be or should not be shared publicly. Do give safe messaging guidelines to the media. Follow up. A suicide can have a long-lasting effect on a community. Grief can last for months and years. Postvention response teams should consider following up to ensure the community is grieving in healthy and productive ways. The group might consider follow-up meetings after a week or 2 and another after a month or 2. It is not only a benefit to the community to follow up, but also to the response team. Take care. Recognize that some of the people working on the postvention response team may also have a personal or other connection to the person who has died by suicide, and that working to prevent suicide is emotional and sometimes heartbreaking work. Be sure that team members themselves access support and counseling services and get the opportunity to debrief. You may want your team members to be trained in critical incident stress management or another post-crisis debriefing model. For a full list of training resources available, please refer to the Postvention Planning Next Steps chapter in the Postvention Guide. Evaluate. After the postvention, the response team should meet to evaluate the team's effectiveness. Talk over what went well and what could have been done to make other efforts go more smoothly. Review and update your plan and your protocols to reflect lessons learned. Review resources and providers and make any necessary changes to your directories or protocols. Major changes to your plan or protocol should be made public so that your community has reasonable expectations for what will happen after a suicide. Even a small postvention effort after a suicide has the potential to significantly reduce the risk of suicide for vulnerable members of the community.